Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
We've had a bunch of stories lately about government bureaucracy, especially at the city level or the state level, involving getting involved in an argument, and you're wondering if you can ever speak to the right person or get the right answer. And a couple days ago, I talked about the guy who was from Virginia, who spent a little time in Massachusetts. And after he left, he got a note saying, well, you have to register your vehicle here in Massachusetts because you had residency here. And he said, well, no, I was just visiting. They said, well, it doesn't matter. And they went back and forth, and that story made the news because at one point they said, no, you've got to register your vehicle here because you spent time here in the past tense. And so it was such a strange article, but it was a true story. And so it just resolved itself in a good way. But it does illustrate the madness that is the Massachusetts RMV. Now, they've dropped the case against the driver from Virginia, but that was only after threatening to suspend his license and after telling him that he needed to have his vehicle registered in both states, again, because he spent 30 days in Massachusetts previously. So I got the update here from CBS Boston. The Registry of Motor Vehicles, hereinafter the RMV, has dropped his case against the driver from Virginia that they had threatened to suspend his license if he did not register his car in Massachusetts. Now, the driver lives and works in Virginia. He visited friends for a month last year and parked on the street. And while there, he says someone narked him out. They called the local constabulary and said, hey, there's an out-of-state car parked out there. And he picked up a couple parking tickets. But then he also got the notice from the RMV threatening him that they're going to take away his driver's license if he did not register his car in Massachusetts. Now, after a TV station got involved, the RMV gave him a 60-day extension to deal with this, and he filed an appeal during that time. I had several people say, Steve, the guy lives in Virginia. Massachusetts can't take away his license. Actually, they can't, but they can get Virginia to take it away for them. So what will happen in a situation, hypothetically, is that a state will say this person who's licensed in your state committed violations here for which his license can be suspended. And they can often ask the other state to suspend it as a courtesy because that state might someday want this state to do the same thing for them. After a hearing, and I'm joking about the courtesy, it's actually a legal thing, but it winds up looking like a courtesy. After a hearing, the RMV determined that the man does not hold residency in Massachusetts. Now, interestingly, that's a slight variation from the original story, which we'll get to in a second. In a letter, the RMV Enforcement Services Unit said the pending suspension has been removed from your record and your driving privileges in Massachusetts remain active. He says he got 2 parking tickets during his visit to Boston and blamed a nosy neighbor for reporting him to the RMV. But I went back and got the piece of the story that I did earlier because the position of the RMV was not that you had to have residency in Massachusetts. They were saying anyone who uses a vehicle in Massachusetts on any 30 days of the year for any reason is required to register their vehicle in the state. That was the position that they had taken earlier. Now they're saying, well, you're not a resident, you don't need to do it. If you look at the statutes in most cases on this, in most states will say if you move here after a certain period of time that you've been here, you are required to register your vehicle and get your driver's license switched over, a bunch of things that you do when you become a resident of the state. Now, that section that they quoted earlier, anyone who uses a vehicle in Massachusetts on any 30 days of the year, isn't talking about residency. It's talking about just simply being there. So let's hypothetical. Let's say at the corner of Massachusetts, there's a road that literally just crosses the corner of the state. Let's just assume that was possible. It's a little corner of the state with a road that crosses it. So to get from here to here, you drove across the corner of the state, and the corner of the state, that piece of road is 1 mile long. Speed limit 70 miles per hour, and you do it just under the speed limit. So each time you cross it, you spend less than a minute in the state. But you cross over and back every single day for the whole year. They'd say, well, you got to register because you're spending more than 30 days of the year here. In fact, all you got to do is do that 2 or 3 times a month. And you'd have to do this because Anyone who uses a vehicle in Massachusetts on any 30 days of the year for any reason is required to register a vehicle in the state. So for them to now say, well, he's not a resident, well, that's what he's been saying all along. He's obviously not a resident. So it's kind of interesting that their defense of the position has changed. But I have to tell you that one of the viewers of my audience sent me a note and said, Steve, check this email exchange out. I'm not sure if you'd like me to give his name or not, so I'm not going to. But he sent an email to the RMV, just a general email address, and said, hey, I'm curious. And he described the case exactly that happened to this guy. But he just said, if I were to do the following, do I need to register my vehicle in Massachusetts? And the person at the RMV wrote him back and said, no, of course not. Something to that effect, because I saw the response. And so the viewer said to me, okay, Steve, now what? And I wrote him back and I said, have you ever been to court or a lot of government offices will have these big signs behind the counter? I'm talking about when you go there in person. And it says, clerks cannot give legal advice. And they put those up for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is they don't want people going to get legal advice from the counter at the Secretary of State's office. But also, who is to say that the person behind the counter who's stamping things and taking pictures for driver's licenses and taking in money for license plate applications, who is to say they actually know the law? Now, sometimes they do have tasks they do that require them to know the law. I can tell you that when I went into a Secretary of State's office in Michigan a few years back to register my canoe, I got some quizzical looks. Because the woman goes, you don't need to register a canoe. I said, it's going to have a boat motor on it. Motorized canoes need to be registered. And she looked at me, cocked her head like Nipper, and then she walked into a back room and I saw her talking to a supervisor. And then they started flipping through books, and she came back out and she goes, oh, you're right. You're right. Of course I'm right. Just kidding. Point is, she didn't know that. Now, I don't blame her for not knowing. That's an obscure rule. How many people come in every day looking to register their motorized canoes? I don't know. But the point is that the sign says these people cannot give legal advice. And I've seen people walk up the counter at the court and ask a question. And if you simply ask, does my name go here or does it go here? I've seen them lean over and go, okay, your name goes there. But that's not really legal advice. But if you walked in and said, hey, I've got somebody on my property, I need to get them ejected. What kind of form do I use for that? They really ought to stop and say, don't know. Because it could be a couple different things depending on the facts. So here, the guy writes the email to the RMV and says, I'm going to spend some time visiting friends in the Boston area. I will be there for 30 days. But when I'm done, I'm coming back. In the meantime, I'm maintaining my residence entirely in the state of Virginia. Do I need to get a license plate and actually register my car in Massachusetts? And the person writing back says, no, of course not. No. That's stupid. And so I sent the gentleman back a note and said, that's one of the reasons they got the sign saying they can't give legal advice. Because they shouldn't. But number two, and this is the important thing, let's suppose you followed that advice. You then went and visited your friend for 31 days. You got the ticket. You got the notice saying that your vehicle was improperly registered. You better register it. So if you go to court now, do you say, oh, but I wrote to the RMV and they said this? And would that be helpful to you? Would that save you? And I can picture a judge looking at the email going, well, that's kind of weird. They don't know the law because they're the ones who are enforcing it. Because we tended to think of an entity that sends out hate mail as the same one that answers the question that you asked them. But they're probably different departments. And quite frankly, the important thing isn't the opinion of the person you wrote an email to. It's what the law says. The question is, what does the law say? So I look at this where it says anyone who uses a vehicle on any 30 days of the year for any reason is required to register a vehicle in the state. If that's what the law says, that's what you got to work with. So when somebody at the state says, well, no, that doesn't apply, it seems odd that they would respond that way. But on the other hand, like I said, you go into court and the judge says, well, gee, the law says this. And you go, but I got an email that says this. Well, guess what the judge follows? So it's a strange situation. But generally speaking, where you live and where you spend your time is where you should register your vehicle, following the local code and so on. However, I do know there are situations where some people do register vehicles in other states. And of course, people like to say, but Steve, U-Haul does it too. Yeah, they do. They do. And they also operate in all 50 states, most likely. But be that as it may, this man's had the charges against him removed. They weren't really charges, but they were telling him that he needed to register his vehicle in Massachusetts or lose his license, and they've removed that threat. So that's good. So it's a good ending to a weird story. But the good news is that once attention got drawn to the silly situation, it got made better. So CBS Boston ran the update. Several people sent me this. Massachusetts RMV drops case against Virginia driver after threatening to suspend his license. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. To do good is better than being good.